My name is Madison Clark, and the night my family tried to erase me did not begin with shouting or slam doors. It began with a white envelope sliding across a linen tablecloth, as quietly as a knife being placed beside a meal. People always imagine betrayal as something loud. In my family, it was performed with perfect posture, polished silverware, and a smile practiced in the mirror. I still remember how the Sterling room smelled that evening: lavender polish, truffle butter, and the faintest trace of cold air following me in from the street. My parents loved that restaurant because everyone there knew who they were. The Clarks, the family that donated, sponsored, hosted, the family that looked flawless from the outside. And I was the piece of the picture frame they always wished they could crop out. That night was supposed to be a pre-graduation celebration for me, or at least that was what the calendar invitation said. In my family, invitations were not gestures of affection, they were summons. You show up, you smile, you fit the image. I walked in already knowing something was off. My mother, Elaine Clark, had her hand resting on my brother Jordan's arm, as if anchoring him to her side. My father, Robert, the real estate mogul who treated emotions like liabilities, gave me the same nod he gave his employees. The nod that said, "You exist, but just barely." I sat down, smoothing my napkin across my lap. Before I could even lift my glass of water, my mother signaled the server. He stepped forward, placing the envelope in front of me, as if delivering a bill. My mother pushed it delicately toward me with 2 fingers. "This is for you, Madison," she said, her voice wrapped in sweetness, the kind of sweetness that hides something bitter underneath. That was the moment my instincts whispered that the evening was not a celebration. It was an execution. But here's the hook. Here is the part I need you to hear before the rest of the story unfolds. The night my family handed me that envelope, they believed they had finally silenced me. They believed they had written the last sentence of my life as their daughter. What they did not know was that I had already started writing a different story. One they could not control, one they could not erase, and the quiet way I opened that envelope was the moment everything they built began to crack. I picked it up slowly, letting the heavy paper settle in my hand. It felt expensive. Of course it did. My parents would never destroy someone with anything less than premium stationery. Jordan lifted his phone just slightly, pretending to check a notification. But I knew he was recording me, waiting for tears, waiting for a scene, waiting for the dramatic proof that I was the unstable one, the difficult one, the outsider. I opened the flap. Inside was a single sheet of embossed paper. My eyes followed the words, but it was my heartbeat that understood them first. "We, the undersigned, hereby release all familial connection, obligation, and association with Madison Riley Clark." It was signed by all 3 of them. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I did not look up. Because the truth is, this letter was only the physical version of something my family had spent years telling me without printing it. I had always been the one outside the frame, the one who did not fit their curated narrative. My mother leaned forward, her smile unwavering. "This is for the best, sweetheart. It is time we all move forward." My father nodded, lifting his wine glass as if to toast the end of me. Jordan finally lowered his phone. He did not look ashamed, he looked satisfied, vindicated, as though he had finally watched the family remove a glitch in their perfect system. I folded the letter once, then again, then placed it beside my plate. "Thank you," I said. 3 faces blinked at me. "Thank you," I repeated, my voice steady. "For being honest at last." My mother shifted back in her seat. My father frowned. Jordan stared, confused as if the script he rehearsed did not account for calm. But they did not know something important. I was not the same Madison they spent years diminishing. I was not the quiet shadow working nights in a tech repair shop to prove my worth. I was not the invisible daughter waiting for a seat at a table that had never been mine. In silence, over months and years, I had been building something of my own. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about me. But that part of the story comes later. Right now, this is the moment that mattered. The moment where I realized that losing my family was not the tragedy they intended. It was the liberation I needed. I stood up slowly, the folded letter still resting on the table. The restaurant lights shimmered across the silverware, catching on the edges of the envelope like the glint of a blade. They thought they had ended me. They had no idea I had already begun. "And if you stay, I will tell you exactly how a quiet girl they tried to erase became the one person they could never outrun. When I walked out of the Sterling room that night, clutching nothing but the weight of my own breath, I realized something simple and sharp. That letter had not begun as paper. It had started years earlier, in the quiet spaces of my childhood, written slowly in the pauses, the glances, the omissions. My family did not disown me at that dinner, they had been rehearsing it my entire life. People assume families fall apart in a single moment. Mine didn't. Mine unraveled over decades, thread by thread, in ways so subtle you could mistake the unraveling for love. I grew up in a house where perfection wasn't encouraged, it was required. My father, Robert Clark, built his real estate empire by measuring everything: square footage, interest rates, market risk. At home, he measured his children with the same metrics: worth, yield, long-term value. Jordan, my older brother, always brought back numbers that made sense to him: top of his class, multiple offers from prestigious prep academies, Ivy League acceptance, a mind that thought in straight lines, just like my father's. Then there was me. When I won my first statewide writing competition at 12, my father read my story, closed the folder, and said, "It is good, Madison. But you do understand writing is not a reliable career path." His version of a compliment was reminding me that my achievement did not fit the family's return on investment vision. My mother was different, but no softer. Elaine Clark could turn compliments into currency. She cared about social presence the way some people care about oxygen. If you ever saw us at a gala, you would think she adored her children. And she did adore Jordan. He was the reflection she wanted the world to see: polished, controlled, predictable. I, on the other hand, was the reflection she always tried to tilt away from the light. At charity events, she would stand between Jordan and me so the photographers captured him at the center. At dinner parties, she always introduced him first. "This is Jordan," she would beam. "He is at Yale. He is interning at a top firm. He is everything a mother could ask for." Then, with a smaller smile, she would add, "And this is Madison. She is creative." Creative was her polite way of saying inconvenient. But here's the hook you need to understand, because it ties everything together. Long before my family handed me that disownment letter, they had already crafted a role for me, and it was not daughter, it was placeholder, background, an accessory that did not match the rest of the room. The real twist is that I spent years believing that if I just worked harder, achieved more, spoke less, I could shift my place in the frame. What I did not know was this: some families do not want you to grow. They want you to shrink. There were small moments that should have warned me. Like the night I brought home a perfect score in calculus and my father said, "That is promising. Jordan scored higher, had he taken that class at your age." Or the afternoon I overheard my mother telling a neighbor, "Jordan is our brilliant one. Madison is still figuring things out." I was 16. I remember standing in the hallway, holding a stack of books pressed to my chest, realizing I was not being raised. I was being compared. Jordan was not cruel. At least, not in the obvious ways. He simply played the role he had been handed: the golden child. When we were kids, he corrected my homework with the tone of a tutor, not a brother. In high school, when I got my first internship offer at a tech company, he told me, "That is cute, Maddie. But Dad says you need a real path if you want to be taken seriously." Cute. The word landed on me like dust. Light, insignificant, easy to brush off. But too much dust can bury you. The truth is, my family didn't need to yell to make me feel small. Silence did the job better. One evening in my sophomore year of college, I received an email confirming I had won a national research grant. It felt surreal. I printed the email, took a photo, and sent it to the family group chat. Hours passed. Nothing. 6 hours later, my mother finally replied, "So proud of you, sweetheart. We have a charity dinner tonight. Can we share your news tomorrow?" They never shared it. That was the night I learned the cost of being the wrong child in the right family. My accomplishments were never ignored because they were unimpressive. They were ignored because they were mine. I wish I could say I confronted them. I didn't. I just got quieter. Quieter until quiet became my normal. Quiet while I worked nights to fund my tuition. Quiet while I built algorithms instead of friendships. Quiet while I watched Jordan shine under lights that were never offered to me. Quiet while collecting proof. I did not know it then, but those years of quiet would later become the sharpest part of my story. The part my family never anticipated. Because silence, when used correctly, is not surrender. Silence is preparation. And the day they handed me that envelope in the Sterling room, they thought my silence meant defeat. They had no idea it meant I was finally ready. People think the worst part of being the forgotten child is the loneliness. It is not. The worst part is how quickly you learn to fold yourself smaller and smaller, hoping someone will notice when you disappear. By the time I reached my second year of college, I had perfected the art of shrinking. I took up less space. I apologized for things I didn't break. I stepped aside in photos before anyone asked. Silence had become not just a habit but a survival skill. But silence, like any currency, eventually demands its payment. After years of living in the shadow of my family's expectations, I started working nights at a small tech repair shop near campus. The kind of place with flickering neon signs and shelves lined with mismatched cables. It smelled like solder and burnt plastic, nothing like my parents' world of glass and polished marble. I liked it because no one cared who my family was. If you fixed someone's laptop correctly, they thanked you. If you didn't, they complained. Fair, measurable, honest. I remember one night vividly. I was behind the counter, swapping a hard drive, when my manager, a man named Tom with coffee breath and the gentlest voice I had ever heard, said, "You work harder than any of the students I hire. You know that." I shrugged. Hard work is predictable. People aren't. He laughed, not understanding that I meant every word. Those nights at the shop were the first time in my life I felt useful in a way that didn't require me to perform. No posture, no script, no fragile image to uphold. Just tasks, problems, solutions. And slowly, quietly, that work taught me something my family never intended for me to learn. Value is not determined by the people who fail to see it. The shift happened during my junior year. I had been studying data engineering, losing myself in algorithms and predictive models, the kind of world where rules exist and outcomes make sense. One afternoon, I received an email from the National Technology Consortium. It read, "Congratulations, Madison Clark. You have been awarded the National Undergraduate Research Grant for your work in algorithmic optimization." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I read it again. And again. That grant was competitive, borderline impossible to get without connections. I had earned it on merit alone. For the first time in years, I felt my chest fill with something that resembled pride. Not the kind my mother posted on social media. Real pride. Quiet pride. The kind that sits in your ribs like a new heartbeat. Naturally, I sent the news to my family group chat. No reply. 2 hours passed. 4. 6. Finally, at 11:12 p.m., my mother responded, "So proud of you, sweetheart. We have a fundraiser tonight. Can we announce it tomorrow?" They never did. And here's the hook that ties everything together. That night, sitting alone in my dorm room with a half-eaten cup of instant noodles, I realized a truth I had been avoiding for years. My family wasn't waiting for me to succeed. They were waiting for me to fail quietly enough that it wouldn't disrupt the picture they presented to the world. Their silence wasn't neglect. It was deliberate. Nothing I accomplished, no matter how impressive, would ever shift my place in their hierarchy. Jordan would always be the chosen one. I would always be the accessory they didn't know how to style. Once you understand a system, you can stop trying to fix it. You can start building your own. That realization changed everything. I stopped trying to insert myself into their conversations. I stopped waiting for their validation. I stopped sending achievements to people who never intended to celebrate them. Instead, I redirected that energy into the only place where my work felt seen: my projects. I spent hours in the campus lab, long after the lights dimmed. I wrote code until my fingers cramped, studied models until my eyes blurred, and read case studies until the sun rose. Slowly, piece by piece, a different version of myself began to take form, one that was not defined by absence, but by creation. Around that time, I began building the early skeleton of what would later become PulseMap. Back then, it was nothing but rough lines of code and a shaky idea about predicting delivery routes with more accuracy. But even in its primitive form, the project felt like mine, not inherited, not assigned, not compared, earned. Meanwhile, on the rare weekends I went home, the house remained exactly the same. My father talking about market trends, My mother showing off Jordan's latest internship like it was a medal. Jordan asking me how school was, in the same tone someone asks about the weather. Nothing changed. Except me. I began to look at my family, not through longing, but through clarity. They were not villains. They were simply incapable of loving a daughter who did not reflect the selves they admired. And if you have ever experienced that kind of distance, the kind that looks like love from afar but feels like emptiness up close, you know how quietly it can break a person. But here is the twist. That quiet breaking, that slow erosion of being unseen, also built something inside me my family never expected: resilience, precision, a need to prove nothing to them, and everything to myself. The grant, the job, the long nights, all of it was the beginning of a life they would never understand. And the reason they could not see it was the very reason it would one day be the thing that shattered their illusion of control. Because when a quiet person finally stops chasing the people who ignore them, they do not disappear, they rise. And my family had no idea I was already learning how to stand. By the time senior year rolled around, I had grown used to the quiet space I occupied in my family's orbit. Not valued, not celebrated, not resented, simply tolerated. A background figure they acknowledged only when it benefited the image they curated for the world. But even with everything I had experienced, nothing prepared me for the moment I learned just how easily they could erase me without hesitation. 2 days before graduation, I was sitting in the campus study lounge, reviewing a simulation for one of my final projects. The building was almost empty. A late spring rain tapped softly against the windows, steady enough to feel like a metronome. My laptop chimed. A family group notification. My first instinct, embarrassingly, was hope. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were planning something kind. A surprise. A gesture. A recognition that I was about to complete something I had worked myself raw to achieve. But when I opened the message, the illusion fell apart faster than I could catch it. A calendar invitation. Subject line: pre-graduation dinner for Madison. Location: Maison Belmont. Dress code: semi-formal. No greeting, no congratulations, no emotion, just instruction. I clicked the reservation link automatically. The page loaded slowly, the spinning wheel doing its best to soften what came next. The reservation read: the Clark family, Robert Clark, Elaine Clark, Jordan Clark. That was it. My name, the supposed reason for the dinner, was nowhere on the list. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a formatting error, a mistake in the system, but the sinking feeling in my stomach told me the truth. There was no glitch. There was no error. I simply didn't exist in the booking. A minute later, Jordan texted me privately. Don't read into it. It's just formatting. Formatting. That single word told me more about my place in my family than a lifetime of dinners and unspoken conversations ever had. I wasn't a person in their world. I was a variable, something you could include or exclude, depending on the presentation. For a moment, the room blurred slightly. I looked down at the glowing cursor on my laptop screen, blinking patiently as if asking whether I planned to continue pretending. I thought back to all the years I had watched my family celebrate Jordan's milestones, with photographers, speeches, catered dinners, and coordinated outfits. And here I was, a reservation without my name. That was when something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, the way a lock clicks open after being stuck for too long. I closed my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't text back. I simply stared at the rain streaking down the window, each line melting into another, and I thought, so this is what erasure looks like. The next morning, my university emailed me the official notice confirming I had earned a speaking role at the commencement ceremony, a recognition given only to those who had shown exceptional academic performance and leadership. I forwarded the email to my family, not because I expected anything, but because some part of me still believed they might soften, even slightly. They didn't reply. Hours passed, then half a day, then a full day. Nothing. The silence was no longer something they slipped into by habit. It was something they chose. It was the language they used to remind me of where I belonged. Later that evening, while reviewing the final modifications to my PulseMap prototype, I realized that the emptiness their silence created was no longer unbearable. It had become spacious, useful, a place where I could build rather than break. And in that quiet, A thought rose when I tried to ignore it first. Maybe the dinner wasn't a celebration at all. Maybe it was a transition, a turning point, a moment where they hoped to finalize what they had been hinting at for years. The strange thing is, your body knows the truth before your mind is ready to admit it. As I reviewed the reservation again, my pulse stayed steady, my hands didn't tremble, my breath didn't catch, because a part of me deep down already knew what was coming. Families don't always disown you loudly. Sometimes they just stop including you quietly. And here is the hook that ties everything together. The night of that dinner, the night my family handed me that envelope, I realized something startling and painfully clear. They had erased my name from the reservation because they believed they had already erased me from their story. What they did not know was that I had been writing a different ending long before they thought to remove me. And if you've ever been treated like an afterthought, you understand this part better than anyone. The moment you are excluded is often the moment you begin to see yourself clearly for the first time. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in the very place you were supposed to belong? If yes, leave a quick comment. I understand. I want to know how many of you have lived inside that same silence. Because what happens next in my story is what happens when the invisible girl finally decides she isn't waiting for a seat at their table anymore. After the reservation without my name, something inside me hardened, but not in the way people imagine. There was no dramatic vow for revenge, no loud declaration. What formed instead was a quiet clarity, the kind that settles in your bones when you finally stop waiting for people to change. I realized that my family wasn't trying to hurt me, not actively, not intentionally. They simply lived in a world where I had never truly existed. And if I wanted a life that felt real, I would have to build it somewhere else. So I did. While my classmates were celebrating senior week, taking photos on the quad, and planning trips to the coast, I locked myself in the basement lab of the engineering building. The hum of old servers became the soundtrack of my nights. The cold, fluorescent lights overhead flickered just enough to remind me how alone I was, but alone felt productive. Alone felt clean. PulseMap began as nothing more than a cluster of scripts, scribbles, and half-finished models scattered across my desk. A predictive engine designed to help small logistics companies optimize delivery routes. Not glamorous, not headline-grabbing, but efficient, necessary, fair. Fairness mattered to me more than I liked to admit. Maybe because fairness was the one thing my childhood had never allowed. I spent hours refining the code, testing variations, simulating scenarios. I would lose track of time until the sun rose, and the janitor unlocked the lab doors for the morning shift. Some days, I ate nothing but vending machine crackers. Other days, I forgot to speak until my throat felt unused. People often believe that the things which change your life come with fireworks. Mine came with the soft clicking of a keyboard and the quiet thrill of watching a line of code finally run without error. But PulseMap wasn't a solo project for long. Leo was the first person to notice what I was building. He was in my data modeling seminar, the kind of guy who wore headphones even when he wasn't listening to music. He glanced at my screen one afternoon and said, "That algorithm shouldn't work." I told him it did. He asked me to prove it. I did. From that moment forward, he was in. A week later, Ruby joined us. She was a design student with ink-stained hands and a habit of seeing beauty in math. She told me PulseMap needed a face humans could trust, something simple, something honest. She said, "You built the brain, let me build the skin." Together, the three of us formed something my family never once created, a team, a world of our own. And working with them changed me. Slowly, quietly. I started laughing again. Small laughs at first, the kind you almost choke back because you're not used to hearing yourself sound happy. I started talking more, not much, but enough for people to notice. Enough for me to notice. For the first time in my life, my value didn't depend on posture or presentation. It depended on contribution, on logic, on effort, on results. One night, around 3 a.m., after a breakthrough with PulseMap's adaptive forecasting feature, I remember leaning back in my chair, watching the simulation numbers shift across the screen. Fuel consumption down, route times shorter, accuracy higher. Proof. Not that I belong to them, but that I belong to something. Here is the part I need you to hear, because it becomes the turning point later. As PulseMap grew, So did I. The more hours I poured into it, the less power my family's silence had over me. Their absence stopped being something to grieve and became something that created space. Space to work, space to breathe, space to imagine a life they couldn't control. The night before the dinner, the one where they would hand me the envelope that erased me, I remember looking around the lab and feeling something close to peace. While my family sculpted their image, I was sculpting my future. And here is the hook, the part that changes everything. PulseMap wasn't just a project. It was proof that I didn't need my family's name to build a life worth remembering. Proof that the girl they thought was invisible had quietly become someone they could never afford to underestimate. If you ever had to build yourself alone, brick by quiet brick, then you understand the power of that proof. And before I move on, let me ask you something small. If you believe people who build in silence deserve recognition, tap like to help this story reach someone who needs it. Because what happens next is the moment my family learns what silence can create when you give it enough time. I didn't know it yet, but PulseMap was about to open the door to a future none of them ever imagined. The first sign that my life was about to change arrived on a morning so ordinary, it felt almost forgettable. The campus was quiet, the halls mostly empty except for a few students dragging themselves toward early classes. I had spent another night in the lab, surviving on cold coffee and stubbornness. PulseMap's newest update had finally stabilized, and for the first time I allowed myself to lean back in my chair and breathe. The sun was just beginning to spill across the floor when my inbox pinged. I expected another reminder from the university or an automated system alert. Instead, the subject line was simple. Inquiry. PulseMap algorithm. Inquiry. A plain word, a small word. But sometimes, the smallest words carry the biggest consequences. Inside the email, the message was short. I saw your demo at the student showcase. I'd like to talk. Grant Miller, CEO, Atlas Freight Systems. I read it twice, then a third time. My tired brain tried to convince me it was a prank or some promotional scam, but the signature block at the bottom told another story. It held a name I recognized instantly. Atlas Freight was one of the largest logistics companies in the Midwest, a corporation that moved millions of packages across thousands of miles every week. Their systems were sophisticated, powerful, expensive, and somehow, their CEO had seen my shaky little demo. I remember staring at the screen, waiting for disbelief to shift into understanding. It didn't. It simply sat inside me like a spark, quiet, bright, and impossible to ignore. 2 days later, I found myself in a glass-walled conference room at Atlas headquarters. The building was everything my family admired, sleek, polished, modern. But this time, I wasn't walking into a world built by them. I walked into one built for me. Grant Miller entered with a tablet under his arm and a look of curiosity in his eyes. Not skepticism, curiosity. The kind of curiosity people give when they're evaluating potential, not pedigree. You built this, he said, tapping the PulseMap simulation on his screen. I nodded. Alone? I hesitated. Mostly. With Leo and Ruby helping now. Good, he said. Means you know how to lead. No one in my family had ever spoken those words to me. He asked questions, hard questions about system integrity, forecasting logic, scalability. Questions meant to test if I understood my own work or simply got lucky. I answered each one. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but honestly, thoughtfully, confidently. When the meeting ended, he shook my hand and said, "You remind me of myself at your age, except you're ahead of where I was." That sentence should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like oxygen. A week later, he asked me to meet him again. This time, a folder waited on the table. Thick, heavy, official. Inside was a letter of intent. Atlas Freight Systems wished to acquire PulseMap for $7.1 million, plus offer me the position of Director of Predictive Systems after graduation. Stock vesting, salary, full creative control over future developments. I didn't speak for several seconds because I physically couldn't. No one had ever valued anything I built this way. Not my family, not my teachers growing up, not the world I was raised in. PulseMap was supposed to be a project, a stepping stone, a quiet triumph. But now, it was becoming the foundation of a future even my imagination hadn't dared to consider. I didn't sign immediately. I took the contract home. I read every clause, every subline, every footnote. I highlighted issues, made notes, asked questions. I wanted to be absolutely certain that the system I built, the system that had grown from silence, loneliness, and stubborn resilience, would not be swallowed whole or reshaped into something I didn't recognize. When I finally signed it, the pen didn't shake. It felt like balance, not victory, not revenge balance, as though the universe had finally adjusted the scale that had always been tilted in my family's favor. That night, alone in my apartment, I printed the final contract and held it in my hands. The paper felt heavier than the disownment letter my family would give me days later. Heavier, but steadier. I slid it into a folder I would soon bring to a dinner where they planned to erase me, a folder that would sit on the table like a quiet rebellion. Here is the part that still stays with me. My family believed they were preparing to cut ties with the weakest version of me. They didn't know they were about to meet the strongest one. And here's the hook I want you to think about. If your family tried to disown you the same week you closed a $1 million deal, would you tell them the truth or let them walk away thinking you failed? Comment your answer. I want to see how differently people would play that moment. Because what happened next became the moment my silence finally spoke louder than their legacy. The night I signed the Atlas contract, something inside me finally aligned. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just correctly. It felt like hearing a note settle into tune after years of being slightly off-key. My life had never fit the rhythm my family imposed on me. But PulseMap, this future I built quietly, privately, fit perfectly. When I placed the folder containing the signed contract on my desk, I didn't feel the need to celebrate. I didn't even feel relief. What washed over me instead was a clarity I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, my worth no longer depended on anyone's approval. Not my father's, not my mother's, not Jordan's, and certainly not the world that had always treated me like a footnote in someone else's story. I wasn't a footnote anymore. But freedom has a strange way of sharpening the past. Once I stepped outside the shadow of my family's expectations, I began to see every moment of dismissal, every quiet insult, every erased achievement, not as wounds but as data, patterns, evidence, proof. And so, without consciously planning it at first, I began to collect it. I opened a new encrypted drive on my laptop and titled it Archive. Simple, unassuming, almost boring. But inside, I began to assemble the paper trail of my life, the one my family never cared to notice. I saved the PulseMap codebase, every version, every iteration. I saved the letters from the university, from grant committees, from research labs. I saved the email from Grant Miller requesting a meeting. I saved the updated offer. I saved the signed contract and the transfer confirmation that followed. Each file was time-stamped, organized, documented. Not for revenge, not at first. I did it because I knew, in some quiet, instinctive part of myself, that the world my family lived in only respected things written on paper, things with signatures and numbers, things that could be measured, and I was finally building something they couldn't ignore, even if they tried. Meanwhile, the Clark household continued its usual performance. My mother posted photos from charity galas, my father shared articles about market trends, Jordan sent our group chat pictures of him shaking hands with executives twice his age. No one asked how I was doing, no one asked about graduation, no one asked about PulseMap. Their silence used to sting. Now, it simply confirmed what I already knew. They weren't paying attention, and people who aren't paying attention can't see what's coming. One evening, a few days before the dinner that would become the turning point of my life, I found myself sitting in my apartment with the entire archive open on my screen. Rows of proof, columns of milestones, years of quiet work. I stared at the collection, and a strange thought settled over me. I wasn't preparing these documents to show the world. I was preparing them for a specific audience, an audience that had never listened to me. My family. That was when I realized something I had never been willing to admit. The pain of being invisible doesn't disappear when you succeed. It just becomes quieter, easier to carry, but never gone. Still, something was different now. Their opinion no longer determined my direction, but it would determine the moment where our paths finally split for good. My fingers hovered over the folder before I printed a physical copy of the contract. The paper slid from the printer warm and smooth, the ink still fresh. I held it the same way someone might hold a letter from a future self, a future they never imagined for me. I slid it into a neutral gray folder, the same color as the conference room where Grant Miller first told me I was a leader. The same gray my mother reserved for things she considered unremarkable. How poetic, I thought, that the folder containing the most important achievement of my life looked ordinary to anyone who didn't open it. The night before the dinner, I packed the archive neatly into my bag. My apartment felt especially quiet, but not the lonely kind of quiet I had grown up with. This quiet felt earned, steady, intentional. I walked around the room, turning off lights one by one, letting the darkness settle behind me. Each click of a switch felt like closing a chapter I no longer needed. And here is where the hook of this moment lies, because this is the part most people don't expect. When my family invited me to that dinner, they thought they were giving me their final judgment. They believed they were ending something. They had no idea I was coming with my own ending, prepared one written in ink they could never wash off. As I zipped my bag and placed my hand on the apartment door, a single thought moved through me, with the calm certainty of truth. They were going to present their letter, but I was bringing mine, and when two stories collide, the louder one isn't always the one spoken out loud. Before I walked out, I caught my own reflection in the window, quiet, composed, someone I recognized at last. If you've ever had to prepare proof of your own worth because the people closest to you refuse to see it, then you understand what this moment feels like. And here is the question I want you to sit with, because it sets the stage for everything that follows. If you had the chance to show your family exactly who you became without them, would you take it? Think about it, because the next chapter is the night I answered that question. The night before the dinner, the city felt strangely quiet, as if it already knew what was coming. Rain pressed lightly against my apartment windows, blurring the lights outside into long streaks of gold and white. It was the kind of weather that made the world feel softer, as if even the sky was exhaling. I sat at my desk, the gray folder lying in front of me. The weight of it wasn't physical, it was symbolic. Years of work, years of silence, years of being unseen until I chose to be visible. I placed my hand on the folder and felt the coolness of the cover, a reminder that proof doesn't need emotion. Proof simply needs to exist. While the rest of the world prepared for an ordinary night, I prepared for something else entirely. The moment my family would try to end my story, and the moment I would reveal I had already written a different ending. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, the aroma filling the small space, grounding me. My apartment was quiet, but not the lonely type of quiet I grew up with. This silence was mine, something I had earned, something I controlled. It felt like standing in a room where the echoes finally belonged to me. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the archive one last time. The timestamps glowed on the screen, rows of undeniable evidence. My achievements, my contracts, my trajectory. Every file was a reminder that success built in silence was still success, sometimes even stronger because no one saw it coming. It struck me then how different tomorrow would look from every family gathering before it. In the past, I had walked into those dinners trying to fit into a place I never truly had. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be walking toward them with hope. I'd be walking toward them with certainty. They were bringing their letter. I was bringing my life. I closed the laptop slowly. The quiet click of it shutting felt final, almost ceremonial, like sealing a chapter I no longer needed to revisit. I walked to the mirror, studying the reflection staring back at me. Not the girl who used to shrink in family photos. Not the student who waited for messages that never came. Certainly not the daughter erased from a dinner reservation. What I saw was someone steady. Someone who had built herself out of nights alone and days spent solving problems no one thought she could solve. Someone who understood that quiet strength wasn't weakness, it was strategy. I tied my hair back, smoothing the strands. Then I chose the outfit for tomorrow, with care not to impress my family, but to remind myself of who I was now. Clean lines, muted colors, not dramatic, not flashy, just undeniable. As I laid the clothes out on the bed, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Don't be late. No heart emoji, no warmth, just instruction like always. I stared at the message for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. There was a time when a text like that would have left me unraveling, wondering what I had done wrong, what I could fix, what I could change. But now Now it simply confirmed what I had already accepted. I wasn't walking into their world tomorrow seeking acceptance. I was walking in to close a chapter they wouldn't realize had ended until it was too late. I placed the gray folder gently into my bag. The zipper glided across the top with a soft hum, sealing everything inside. That sound felt like a boundary, a line drawn cleanly between the girl they dismissed and the woman I had become. Before going to sleep, I stepped out onto my balcony. The air smelled like rain and city steel. Below me, headlights drifted through puddles, blurring into each other like moving reflections. Somewhere in that mosaic of light, I imagined the future waiting for me, one not tied to their approval. And here's the truth I didn't fully understand until that moment. Sometimes the most life-changing moments happen long before the confrontation itself. Sometimes the transformation comes in the quiet decision to stop seeking permission from people who never intended to give it. I took one long breath, letting the cool air settle deep into my lungs. Tomorrow wasn't about proving anything. Tomorrow was about revealing what was already true. As I turned to go back inside, a thought crossed my mind, sharp, undeniable, almost electrifying. My family believed they were prepared to deliver an ending. They hadn't considered the possibility that I might bring a beginning. It made me wonder something I now want you to think about too. If you knew tomorrow would be the day your family finally saw who you truly became, would you walk into that room quietly? Or would you make sure the silence spoke for you? Because the next part of this story is where my silence finally becomes impossible to ignore. The next evening, the sky over the city looked strangely polished, as if the rain from the night before had washed everything clean. My reflection in the glass door of the Sterling room stared back at me, steady, composed, someone I finally recognized. I stepped inside. The restaurant smelled of truffle butter and candle smoke, a scent I had known my whole life but never really belonged to. The hostess looked up, recognized the name Clark, and guided me toward the private dining room without checking the list. That alone told me everything about the world my family lived in. Doors opened for them automatically until tonight. My family was already seated under a halo of chandelier light, staged like a portrait. My mother's practiced smile, my father's authoritative posture, Jordan adjusting his cufflinks like he was preparing for a press conference. For a moment, no one stood. No one hugged me. No one said, "We're proud of you." Just 3 pairs of eyes watching me walk toward my seat as if I were a scheduled inconvenience. My mother was the first to break the silence. "Madison, darling, you're just on time." Her voice was warm, but the kind of warmth that doesn't radiate, it reflects. Before I even finished settling in, a server approached and placed a white envelope in front of me. The same kind of envelope from the night they disowned me on paper, long before they dared to do it out loud. My father cleared his throat. "It's time we formalize things," he said. Formalize. As if I were a contract they needed to terminate. Jordan angled his phone just slightly, pretending he was scrolling, but I could see the camera open at the corner of the screen. He wanted to capture the moment I broke, but I didn't. I picked up the envelope calmly, sliding a finger under the flap. Inside was a document printed on heavy paper, their favorite kind of stationery for important emotional betrayals. "We hereby release all familial ties, obligations, and connections with Madison Riley Clark." The signatures sat at the bottom, clean, confident, as if signing away a daughter was as simple as authorizing a wire transfer. My mother rested a hand on her wine glass, her expression softening with rehearsed sympathy. "This is for the best, sweetheart. Truly." I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it beside my plate like a napkin I no longer needed. "Thank you," I said. Jordan blinked. "Wait, you're thanking us?" "Yes. For the clarity." The table went still. Someone at the neighboring table laughed, unaware they were sitting beside a family dissolving itself. My father's voice tightened. "This isn't a negotiation, Madison." I nodded. "Good. Because I didn't come here to negotiate." I reached into my bag and pulled out the gray folder, the one I had carried like a quiet promise the night before. I placed it on the table and slid it toward them. "What is this?" my father asked, suspicion flickering across his face. "My life," I said. "The one you didn't ask about." My mother hesitated before opening it. When she did, her breath caught almost imperceptibly. Jordan leaned forward, face draining of its smug confidence. My father's jaw clenched hard enough I could hear the click of his teeth. Inside the folder was the acquisition letter. Atlas Freight Systems, $7.1 million. Director of Predictive Systems. My name at the top, written in ink no one could erase. My mother looked up first. You sold something? A program? No, Mom. I built something. And yes, I sold it. My father's face reddened. Without consulting us? The question stunned me, not because of what he said, but because of how foreign it felt, as if he believed he still had a say in the architecture of my life. Without consulting you, I repeated. Because it isn't your life. Jordan exhaled sharply. This is insane. You're telling me you of all people closed a multi-million-dollar deal? I smiled. Quietly. The way someone smiles when a storm they've weathered finally breaks behind them. Yes, Jordan. Me of all people. For once, he had nothing to say. My mother lowered the letter and whispered, barely audible, we didn't know. I know, I said. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of dismissal, the kind I had grown up with. This was the silence of realization, the silence of a story flipping itself inside out. I stood, lifting my bag from the back of the chair. You can keep your letter, I told them. I won't need it, but I want you to remember something. 3 pairs of eyes looked up at me, stunned, confused, suddenly aware they had miscalculated. You didn't end anything tonight. You just confirmed I never needed you to begin with. I turned and walked toward the door, passing the chandelier light that once made me feel small. Now it only reflected the person I had become. And here's the hook I want you to sit with. What would you do if the family that erased you suddenly realized you became someone they could never control? Before I go on, tell me in the comments. Would you have left quietly like I did? Or would you have ordered dessert just to keep them uncomfortable? I need to know which team you're on. Because the final part of this story is what happens after the door closes behind me. When I walked out of the Sterling room that night, the air felt colder than I expected. Not harsh, not biting, just clean. Clean in the way a hallway feels after the lights turn off. Clean in the way a stage feels after the actors leave. Clean in the way a life feels when you finally stop trying to earn a role that was never written for you. I didn't look back. People always imagine revenge as a dramatic moment, a shout, a slammed door, a clever final line. But sometimes revenge is just the quiet sound of your heels against marble floors, while the people who underestimated you sit behind a glass wall, realizing too late that the story they thought they controlled has slipped out of their hands. When the restaurant door closed behind me, it was like a punctuation mark, not a period, a semicolon, something ending, something beginning. My phone buzzed as I walked toward the street. I expected a message from Atlas, or maybe another system update from the PulseMap servers. Instead, it was a text from Jordan. We didn't mean for it to go like that. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, watching the little typing bubble appear and disappear, like he couldn't figure out what to say next. But his words didn't feel like an apology. They felt like someone realizing they had cut down a tree without noticing it had already grown roots beyond their reach. I didn't reply. I simply turned my phone screen dark and slipped it back into my bag. Some messages aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to echo. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, joggers in bright jackets, the rumble of passing trains, the faint hum of traffic lights shifting colors. It felt grounding, honest. Cities never pretend. They don't care who your family is or what your last name means. You either build something here or you don't. And I had built something. When I arrived back at my apartment, I placed the gray folder on the counter, right beside a framed photo of my college acceptance letter, not because I needed to brag to myself, but because I wanted to remember 2 things side by side: who I used to be, and who I had become. I took out the disownment letter my parents had handed me at dinner. The paper suddenly looked small, almost fragile. A document meant to define me reduced to nothing more than a reminder of who no longer had the right to speak on my future. I slid it behind the framed acceptance letter. Not hidden, just categorized, filed, archived. Evidence of what was, proof of what changed. The morning sun filtered into the apartment, slicing through the blinds in long rectangular shapes that fell across the floor. I made coffee the way I liked it, strong enough to wake the soul, quiet enough not to interrupt the stillness. As I set the mug down, something clicked into place. A realization I hadn't felt fully until that moment. I hadn't lost a family. I had lost a boundary that was never mine to carry. That silence, people fear the silence of being alone, suddenly felt peaceful, chosen, earned. Meanwhile, my inbox filled quickly. News outlets, picking up the PulseMap acquisition. A message from Grant congratulating me again. Investors reaching out. Conference invitations. Panels. Opportunities. The world, it seemed, had been waiting for me, while I had been waiting for a family that never looked in my direction. I stepped out onto my balcony, the city stretching wide beneath me, cars gliding down wet streets, steam rising from vents in the pavement. For the first time, I didn't feel overshadowed by the skyline. I felt part of it. And here's the part that surprised me most. Revenge didn't feel like fire, it felt like calm. The kind of calm you earn after choosing yourself in a place where you were once told you didn't belong. My family erased me, but they also freed me. They freed me to build. They freed me to rise. They freed me to become someone they couldn't claim, couldn't measure, couldn't diminish. Someone I recognize now. Someone I finally liked. Before I end this chapter, here's the hook I want you to sit with. Sometimes walking away isn't running. Sometimes walking away is arriving at the version of yourself you were always supposed to be. And now I want to ask you something honestly, gently. If you were in my place that night, walking out of that restaurant, would you have turned back even once? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear every version. And if my story resonated with you, if you've ever been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the underestimated one, then make sure you hit subscribe, because this isn't the last story. It's just the first one I finally get to tell in my own voice.